Adam here with your latest weekly Greater Brisbane update, the second last one of the year. As always, we'll start with the state-level stories that affect people right across the region before moving through Brisbane, Logan, Ipswich, the Redlands and Moreton Bay. This video is brought to you by YB Painting and Excel Psychology, and time is running out to take advantage of YB's special festive discount, but we'll get to that later. There's a lot to get through this week, from tourism growth and Olympics infrastructure to hospitals, weather recovery, local controversies, and some genuinely interesting city plans. So let's get to it. Sorry it took a little while to get this one out, but we had some last-minute updates come through, and I also wanted to be very considered in my wording when it came to some issues. But here we go. First up, some positive news. Brisbane is continuing to see strong growth in international visitors, with the latest figures showing a steady increase in overseas arrivals. In the last financial year, Brisbane had over 500,000 international visitors who'd left $3.1 billion in the city by the time they left. They also stayed for longer, racking up 7.5 million nights between them, a new record for the city. Of those, 2.2 million nights were booked by Japanese visitors, a new record for Nihonjin. The largest number of visitors were Kiwis, followed by the UK, China and the US. According to Brisbane Economic Development Agency, international visitor numbers are now tracking well above pre-pandemic levels, and that's flowing through to hotels, restaurants, events and the broader visitor economy. Here on the Brisbane Channel, we'll be watching closely to see how tourism changes over the next 10 years or so as Brisbane gets more attention in the lead up to and during the Olympic and Paralympic Games, as well as after the events. Speaking of the Olympics, we've now got confirmation of who will deliver the bulk of the Games infrastructure. An international consortium known as Unite 32, led by Lang O'Rourke and AECOM, has been selected as the state's preferred delivery partner for major Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic projects. AECOM is the delivery partner for the Los Angeles Games in 2028. This group will be responsible for design coordination, construction and long-term planning across 17 venues, including stadia and supporting infrastructure. The government says locking this in early reduces risk, improves coordination and gives industry more certainty. But considering we're about 6.5 years out from the events, some may dispute the use of the word early in the government spiels. For those wondering about progress with Victoria Park, GECA have said that geotechnical assessments are nearing completion and a report would be ready by early January. They say that doesn't necessarily mean they'll have a decision on the specific location of Brisbane Stadium, as they want the architect to be part of that decision, and the architect won't be decided for another 2 or 3 weeks. Either way, appointing a delivery partner is a major milestone, and hopefully we'll actually see something physical happening very soon. The next update will certainly be one that people will have diverse stances on. On Friday, the state government released a review into the evidence base for benefits or harms of puberty blockers and gender-affirming therapies for children and adolescents with gender dysphoria, and whether they would proceed with their ban on the delivery of those therapies in Queensland's public hospitals or not. The review concluded that there was very limited data to determine the benefits or harms of delivering the therapies to young people. This was due to issues with the methodologies used in many of the studies, as well as the short-term nature of most studies to date. The terms of reference required the research team explore 3 options: continuing to make the therapies unavailable in Queensland public hospitals, making them available, and making them available but with a new system of oversight and monitoring. While the researchers were not allowed to make any recommendations, they found that the first option carried many risks, the second may offer benefits to patients but still carried some risks, and the third option may be beneficial based on the limited research that was available. The state government announced they would be continuing their pause on allowing the therapies to be delivered in public hospitals across the state, pending the results of a long-term research project in the UK called the Pathways Trial. Those results will be available in 2031. They said that the evidence base is limited and there is a lack of evidence about long-term risks or benefits. The Health Minister Tim Nicholas has said that it is in the public interest that the provision of healthcare to children in our public hospitals should be based on the strongest available evidence. In the My Two Cents segment after the updates in this video, I'll share a little more detail around what the report says and some of the complexities of this issue. I've also posted the LNP government's full media release, the Labor opposition's response, and the Greens' response for channel members at insider level or above on a new webpage that will have extra content that expands on some of the topics covered in these updates. Sticking with health, let's now talk about hospital infrastructure. The state government has provided an update on hospital upgrades across Queensland, including expansions, redevelopments and capacity increases designed to keep up with population growth. The current state government has pushed back some timelines from the original plans drawn up by the former government, saying that the timelines were unrealistic and could not be achieved. Let's break down what changes we'll see to hospital upgrade plans in Greater Brisbane hospitals. Logan was expecting 112 beds to be delivered by December next year. This will now be done in 2027. 112 beds were also set to be added at the QE2 hospital in Brisbane by the second half of 2027. They'll now be in use from 2028. Redcliffe Hospital was looking forward to 204 new beds by the fourth quarter of 2027, but it will now get 210 beds by 2032. They will be added gradually over time, with the first beds arriving in 2027. Princess Alexandra Hospital will get 249 new beds, expanded cancer care and additional parking by 2028. I wasn't able to find a clear timeline proposed by the former state government to compare with. As for Ipswich Hospital, their 200-bed expansion was set for completion in 2027, but is now expected in 2028. This could be seen as a shift to a more realistic approach, but it could also be viewed as a deprioritizing of the upgrades. That's for you to judge. I'll just share the information available and let you make up your mind on where you stand. Sticking with hospital upgrades, the state government has confirmed funding for additional perinatal mental health beds in Brisbane, Logan and Ipswich, aimed at easing pressure on Greater Brisbane hospitals as part of a broader statewide initiative. Mater South Brisbane will be expanded from 8 to 10, and Logan and Ipswich will each get 4 new perinatal mental health beds. Given how often health access comes up in community feedback, the hospital expansions are something we'll be tracking here on the Brisbane Channel as progress becomes clearer. Of course, make sure you're subscribed with all notifications enabled so that you can stay in the loop. The state government is spending around $18.5 billion on their hospital rescue plan, but you don't need to spend nearly that much on making your home look $1 million, and you still have just over a week to take advantage of YB Painting's 15% festive discount. YB recently won first or second place in 5 different categories of the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, and when you see their professionalism and the quality of their work, it's no surprise. With fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on all their work, you can be sure there'll be no unpleasant surprises. Claim your special 15% discount by scanning this QR code or the link in the video description by New Year's Day. Also announced this week are initiatives including new homes with built-in wraparound supports for young mothers and their children who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. In Ipswich, the Lady Musgrave Trust will deliver 13 new self-contained homes with on-site wraparound supports to help young mothers maintain secure housing, build long-term stability, and stay connected to education, training, and community services. In Brisbane, Mercy Community will deliver accommodation, mental health services, and parenting support to vulnerable pregnant women and new mothers to help them maintain a healthy pregnancy and safely care for their baby. It's hoped these projects will improve outcomes for both parents and their children. As always with programs like this, the effectiveness will come down to accessibility, long-term funding certainty, and whether services are actually available where they're needed most. And finally, in the statewide block, disaster recovery. Following the recent hailstorms that caused widespread damage across parts of Brisbane and surrounding areas, the state government has announced support measures for affected residents and businesses. These include assistance, grants and recovery services, particularly for people dealing with uninsured damage, temporary displacement or business interruption. The support will be available to people in these suburbs. If you are affected and haven't already checked eligibility, it's definitely worth doing. I'll link details in the description. Moving on to LGA-specific updates now, and from Brisbane, one of the more contentious stories of the week. Brisbane Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner has accused Greens councillor Trina Massey of spreading anti-Semitic material. This comes after the release of a report by independent assessor Fairfax Consulting Services that found an article in the councillor's Spring 2024 newsletter breached council policies and procedures. The article, titled Khalil's Story, took up 2 pages and was based on an interview with a Palestinian refugee family living in Brisbane, but also included a timeline of the Israel-Palestine war and referred to genocide in Palestine. The assessment of the councillor's conduct was initiated after the Office of the Independent Assessor received 6 complaints about the article. Key complaints included that the article breached council policies and procedures, was biased and inaccurate, incited hatred against Zionists and Israelis and was anti-Semitic, and that it made Jewish residents feel unsafe. The assessment found that the material equated to propaganda and that Councillor Massey had violated several sections of the Councillor Code of Conduct. Council's Ethics Committee has ordered Councillor Massey to apologise for the newsletter and to repay $10,000 of ratepayers' money spent on publishing the article. While the article was found to be strongly biased, with Councillor Massey herself admitting that the timeline of the conflict was not a comprehensive one, but only selected events, there was no finding that the article was anti-Semitic. Language used in discussing this kind of subject matter is important, and in criticising Councillor Massey's actions, Brisbane Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner did not hold back.
And we've seen Greens politicians, not just Councillor Massey, fanning the flames of anti-Semitism. They are literally repeating Hamas talking points.
This is too big an issue to do justice to in this brief update, but I will be breaking down both the article and the Lord Mayor's public statements in the My 2 Cents segment later in this video. This is a sensitive topic, particularly in the light of the recent events in Bondi, but that also makes it even more important that we can discuss these matters in a rational, level-headed way, as emotional as they may be to us. On a much lighter note, the Kangaroo Point Bridge has just marked its first anniversary, and the numbers are well above expectations, over 3.4 million crossings in its first year. The bridge is averaging close to 10,000 trips per day, far exceeding original forecasts of 6,100 daily crossings by 2036. Riverfire 2025 saw a record single-day usage with over 27,000 trips across, and the structure has picked up numerous design and sustainability awards. Whether you supported it or opposed it during its planning, it's clear that the bridge has become a heavily used piece of active transport infrastructure and increasingly a destination in its own right. Brisbane's cultural scene has also had a moment in the spotlight this week, with the 10 Tenors being awarded the keys to the city. It's one of the city's highest civic honours and recognises their 3 decades of global success and their role as ambassadors for Brisbane's creative talent. They now join a fairly exclusive list of recipients, including the Bee Gees, Savage Garden and Australia's Olympic teams. Next is a very ambitious proposal that would completely transform the area around Roma Street Station, but first a shout out to the other sponsor of this video, Excel Psychology. If you're looking for support with anxiety, depression, stress, ADHD or relationship challenges, Excel Psychology may be what you're looking for. They're a warm, inclusive psychology practice based in Spring Hill, about 500 metres from Central Station. With a diverse team of clinical and registered psychologists, they'll help match you with the right psychologist for your needs, often with short wait times. They offer Medicare rebates with a mental health treatment plan and also support WorkCover and NDIS participants. I have a video featuring some of the members of the Excel team giving tips on dealing with stress that you can check out here, and I'll put a link in the video description as well. An ambitious new urban design proposal called the Roma Street Canopies has been getting attention across planning and architecture circles recently. Rather than being a traditional building, this concept seeks to transform the Roma Street rail yards, an area that currently acts like a barrier between parts of the city, by building a raised walkable green canopy over the train lines. Approximately 7.5 hectares of new parkland, gardens and pedestrian pathways could be added to the heart of the CBD. Pedestrians could move seamlessly, for example, from Roma Street Station to Victoria Park on a single flat level instead of dealing with steep hills, hot exposed streets and busy roads. Proponents argue this could do more than just create parkland. It could also unlock opportunities for residential or hotel developments around the rail corridor, potentially adding dwellings and economic activity close to key transport infrastructure. At this point, it's important to note that the Roma Street canopies idea is a concept, not a council or state government project yet, but discussions are underway with state and local governments and potential partners as part of a proposed submission to Economic Development Queensland. Moving south to Logan now, and a significant announcement tied to the Olympics. Logan City Council and Griffith University have signed a memorandum of understanding to explore building a major baseball and softball stadium on Griffith's Logan campus. The plan focuses on private investment and long-term legacy, with supporters arguing it could position Logan as the home of diamond sports in Queensland. Baseball and softball are confirmed for the 2028 LA Olympics, but sports for Brisbane 2032 are still to be finalised, making this proposal both ambitious and speculative at this stage. However, Mayor John Raven says this is not just about building a venue for the Olympics, it's about creating a legacy for the city of Logan. He set a deadline of 3 months to secure private funding for the stadium.
We need to have the letters of intent that would say that investors will build the stadium here if baseball and softball become Olympic sports to 2032. We will need to have that by March, in my mind. I know the decision is announced later in the year, but the sooner we have that proof that we're serious and the investors are serious about making this a reality, the better.
Raven met with potential investors in Taiwan and Japan in September and has said there's also been strong interest from investors in the UAE more recently. The stadium is expected to cost up to $100 million to build, but Council has also committed to other infrastructure projects, including a new green bridge over the M1 for pedestrians, cyclists and public transport, which Griffith University's Vice-Chancellor says would also be a game-changer for the Logan campus. The proposal has won support from the World Softball Confederation, Baseball Australia, and the Brisbane Bandits have committed to making it their home stadium if it becomes a reality. Staying in Logan, and protests over the use of a controversial method used by commercial fishers has led to a proposal by the state government to ban it. Gillnetting uses a vertical mesh wall to trap fish by their gills and is being used in the Logan and Albert rivers to catch barramundi and king threadfin salmon. Local fishers say they've seen a drop in fish numbers that has coincided with a visible increase in commercial fishing. The Queensland Boating and Fisheries Patrol has found the nets also trap untargeted aquatic wildlife, having discovered turtles, birds and water dragons trapped in the nets. Commercial fishers have said that banning gillnetting will adversely affect their livelihoods if alternative methods aren't provided. The proposal to ban gillnetting south of Tin Can Bay is open to community consultation until the 21st of January. There's a link in the video description. While we're talking about fish, let's swim across to Ipswich, where efforts to reintroduce a sustainable population of native cod in the Brisbane and Bremer rivers are starting to bear fruit. Over the past 5 years, tens of thousands of Mary River cod fingerlings have been released into Ipswich rivers and creeks. Recently, an adult specimen was recorded for the first time using the Bremer River fishway. Mary River cod are an apex predator that can help control numbers of harmful introduced species, including tilapia, carp and mosquito fish. Another positive update for Ipswich is that design and construction of the $41 million Western Grandstand at North Ipswich Reserve is about to officially kick off, with Buildcorp awarded as the successful tenderer. It's the first stage in the development of a national standard sport and entertainment precinct, which will feature a 12,000-seat rectangular stadium. The project aims to modernise facilities while preserving the site's heritage character. In the Redlands, the state government has announced that land has been unlocked on North Stradbroke Island for future use. The 7,700 square metre freehold block, located near the Dunwich Ferry Terminal, will be sold on the condition that it will be used for tourism purposes to support local jobs. It's expected to bring fresh energy to North Stradbroke Island's visitor economy and help secure a stronger future for local businesses. Back on the mainland, Redland Council has rejected a locally proposed plan for Wynham Creek, clearing the way for a state-led and funded car park project. Councillors voted to reject the proposal by Redland Investment Corporation, which included a supermarket but limited parking options, in favour of the state government-led plan. While some councillors pushed for further consultation and planning, the majority voted to support the state government's car park plans to put an end to what they say has been 12 years of planning and delays. Over in Moreton Bay, Council has installed new road escape hatches on Bribie Island, a wildlife collision hotspot. The hatches are designed to help kangaroos and wallabies avoid traffic and reduce vehicle collisions. The installation of these hatches follows a world-first trial of smaller hatches designed for koalas in Moreton Bay, which we reported on some time ago. It's a relatively simple intervention, but one that can have real safety and animal welfare benefits. Finally, Moreton Bay Council says it's ramping up efforts to attract affordable student accommodation, particularly near education precincts. They've introduced a new policy that allows council to remove development application fees and infrastructure charges to encourage more affordable student accommodation across the city. This comes after faster than expected expansion of the University of the Sunshine Coast's campus at Moreton Bay Central. With rising rents and growing student numbers, councils across Greater Brisbane are increasingly looking at purpose-built options as a part of the housing mix. That's all for the updates for this week, so now it's time for me to give my 2 cents on a couple of things, and this week it's tricky, as the 2 topics I'll be discussing are issues that people can have quite different and often passionate opinions on. And I also need to choose my words very carefully so that nothing I say is misinterpreted. I'll be sharing my perspective on Councillor Massey's article and the Lord Mayor's response, and the release of the Transgender Hormone Therapies Review. I'll start with the review into evidence around the potential harms or benefits of administering puberty blockers to children and adolescents experiencing gender dysphoria, and the state government's decision after receiving the results. First, I want to make it clear that I'm only discussing this review and have not researched this topic outside of that, and will not be evaluating the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. But I think it's important that we look at the independent review and what it actually found, so that we can form our own opinions on how appropriate the state government's decision to continue the pause on the blockers is, based on the actual data and conclusions from the report itself, and not on personal opinions or ideologies. First, some background on the terminologies used. Puberty blockers are hormone therapies which delay the onset of puberty. That is, they put a hold on the development of secondary sex characteristics, such as breast development or facial hair, and are categorized as stage 1 treatments. Stage 2 therapies are the ones that have a masculinizing or feminizing effect, and are referred to as gender-affirming hormone treatment, or GAHT. In discussing these, I'll simply talk of stage 1 and stage 2 therapies. The last thing I need to mention is the term gender dysphoria. This is the clinically significant distress that results from a person's gender identity differing from their birth-registered sex. The report states that not all transgender or gender-diverse people have gender dysphoria. So let's get to the findings of the review. In a nutshell, they found that the evidence base for the application of stage 1 and stage 2 treatments for young people is limited. This is due to a range of factors, including limitations in the methodologies used, the fact that many studies were short-term or observational only, and that outcomes may not always be able to be attributed to one intervention. They found that there was a paucity of evidence, that is, not enough evidence to draw any conclusions, around the use of stage 1 treatment before stage 2 treatment. There was some evidence that increasingly suggests that stage 1 and stage 2 treatments can alleviate existing gender dysphoria stress when used appropriately, but this evidence was not of a high quality and was considered as preliminary evidence, which pointed to the possibility rather than proving it outright. Evidence was stronger that stage 1 treatment had a negative impact on bone density and that stage 2 treatment negatively affected fertility, but there was a paucity of evidence for any other risks or benefits of each treatment. Based on these findings, the reviewers assessed the risks or benefits of 3 scenarios, as we mentioned in the update. They found that continuing the pause on administering stage 1 and 2 treatments to minors in public hospitals carried legal, ethical, and social risks, and risks with regard to governance, regulatory, and oversight considerations. As for re-implementing a program for administering the treatments to minors in public hospitals, the review found that this presented potential benefits to young people, but but carried many of the same risks of the previous option. The third option was to make the treatments available to minors, but with enhanced oversight and monitoring. The review suggested that this may have beneficial outcomes for young people, may remove the risks identified in the first two options, and had the benefit of providing more data for research. So to sum it up, the review suggests that it is likely that making the treatments available to minors may be beneficial, but that this is based on research data that is limited and not conclusive. In looking at the response of the state government, I'll attempt to see their side, but will also share what I personally think really lies behind their response. The Health Minister has said that out of an abundance of caution, they only want to base their decisions on firm, conclusive evidence. There's certainly merit in taking that kind of approach, and the only firm evidence from the review was that there were risks to bone density in the short to medium term and to fertility. But where it gets messy is when you're selective with when you apply that quality evidence only approach. You can't say we only want firm evidence when it comes to hormone therapies for minors, but then choose to ignore the firm evidence supporting pill testing services, for example. And it gets even more complicated here when preliminary evidence suggests there may, in fact, be benefits to making the therapies available to minors. This is where ideology comes in. The tendency to prefer to focus on the risks or the benefits will likely come from where you stand on the issue before presented with the data, and it's pretty clear that the Conservative state government just doesn't want it. But at the end of the day, you could say that they're enacting democracy by acting in a way that they would think reflects the people who voted them in. They're reflecting the desires of their constituents, and I suppose it makes sense that they would want firm evidence if they were to go against that for the good of the entire community, including those who voted differently. I love the idea of democracy, but I guess it's just a limitation of the form that we have in place, that elected representatives don't really need to represent their entire community, just a portion of it, and to make sure there's enough of them to vote them in next time. But enough on that, let's move to the issue within Brisbane City Council. In the light of the recent tragic events at Bondi, this is a delicate matter, but one that we also shouldn't shy away from. The Brisbane Lord Mayor has come out saying that Councillor Massey is fanning the flames of hatred and anti-Semitism in our community. I thought it was time for a level-headed look at the situation, and I feel that both Massey and Schrinner's actions and words should be examined, but without bias or sensationalism. Let's start by looking over the article itself. It outlines the story of a man called Khalil, who as a child was expelled from his home in the city of Jaffa with his family by Israeli forces. It uses his story to introduce the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. A timeline gives a history of conflict dating from the 1500s to the present. The second page outlines Western media and government's responses to the situation, and then follows with a call to support a local pro-Palestinian organisation and includes QR codes linking to pro-Palestinian or anti-Zionist resources. As I said in the update, words are very important when it comes to these issues, and we need to come back to the distinction between anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic in a moment. The 2 pages were distributed in the Wollongab Awards quarterly newsletter in spring of 2024. In all, the total costs incurred in producing the newsletter were just under $20,000. After 6 complaints were lodged against the councillor, an independent review was conducted. I already mentioned what the complaints were in the update, so I won't go over those again. But the investigation into whether she had breached the code of conduct focused on 4 points. That she had not 1. Respected and complied with all policies, procedures and resolutions of local government. 2. Had proper regard for other people's rights, obligations, cultural differences, safety, health and welfare. 3. Made it clear when making a public statement whether she was speaking on behalf of local government or expressing her personal views. And 4. Avoided any action which may diminish council's standing, authority or dignity. The report found that, on balance, the allegations were substantiated. Key findings were that the article, in its selective inclusion of events in the conflict's timeline, amounted to propaganda, based on the Cambridge Online Dictionary's definition of it being information, ideas, opinions or images, often only giving one part of an argument, that are broadcast, published or in some other way spread with the intention of influencing people's opinions. This, the report says, is supported by the call to arms under the heading "What Can We Do?" The councillor herself admitted that there were no counter-arguments presented. It was found that the article did not meet any requirements for the use of public funds, particularly with the policy that it's not in the public interest that council-funded facilities be used where personal opinions are represented as a council position. The report then makes disciplinary recommendations, but my main purpose of examining the report is to understand what the allegations were and how well founded they were. After reading the review, it's clear that the contents of the article were one-sided, reflected the opinions of the councillor, and did not comply with the policies of how public funds are spent. However, there was nothing in the article that was found to be false or inaccurate, but it was clearly facts selected to support a particular view. For example, the timeline did not include the October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel. So what we can establish is that Massey did breach the council's code of conduct. But now let's move to the Lord Mayor's statements about her conduct. The Lord Mayor held a press conference to share about the situation, and here are his words.
And we've seen Greens politicians, not just Councillor Massey, fanning the flames of anti-Semitism.
This is echoed in the council release on the matter, which says Councillor Massey has rightly been reprimanded for fanning the flames of hatred and anti-Semitism in our community. And here's where we need to be very considered in how we approach things and how we use our words. So what's the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Anti-Semitism is prejudice, hostility, or discrimination against Jews as a people, race, or religion. Things like hate speech, or in the extreme, actions like we saw at Bondi, or in 1930s and 40s Germany. Anti-Zionism, on the other hand, is an opposition to Zionism, which itself is a movement for the Jewish people to have a national home, a nation of their own. So anti-Zionism is not hatred directed at Jewish people, but a denial of their right to have their own country on the land where modern-day Israel sits. I'm not here to get into whether Israel should be a country or not, but we need to be able to differentiate between being against a political idea and being against a whole people, culture, or religion. They're not the same thing. There are Jews who are not Zionists, even though most are. But what seems to be happening these days is that any criticism of the Israel government's actions is equated to anti-Semitism. People can hate a regime without passing any kind of judgment on the people that they rule over. But I can see that a lot of harm can come from presenting an issue without balance. The article Massey distributed to her constituents spoke of widespread massacres, systematic rape, and other terror-inducing tactics in Palestine by Zionist European militias. There's no denying that these events occurred, but when atrocities like these are presented without ample context, if there is existing anti-Jewish sentiment, it's understandable how this could indeed feed that sentiment, even if that is not the intended effect. I certainly don't want to sound like I'm downplaying evils committed by either Israel and their supporters or the terrorist organization Hamas. But this is not about looking at what's happening in Israeli and Palestinian territory, where we've seen both good and evil on both sides. This is about what's happening here in Brisbane. Councillor Massey showed some poor judgment in her enthusiasm to share some of her views, but Schrinner has seized on this as an opportunity to attack an opposing party, not simply calling out Massey's actions, but drawing in the entire Greens party. It is pretty clear that Brisbane Greens councillors have often been outspoken on defending Palestinian people and opposing Israel's actions in Gaza, and that the LNP tend to be quite supportive of Israel. But at this time, when parts of the nation are still in mourning, I think trying to leverage that for political point scoring is also not commendable. I'm not talking about the timing of the announcement, as that was a coincidence. I'm talking about the words used to communicate about it. We've seen here in Brisbane evidence of both anti-Islamic and anti-Semitic attitudes, with the mosque defaced just this last week, and apparently things like discrimination against local Jewish musicians.
We've had Jewish musicians banned from performing in West End clubs where they used to be welcomed. We've had Jewish members of the LGBTIQ community being banned and ostracised. They don't have a place anymore.
But I also think that the best way to counter this is not to divide, to oversimplify issues, or to deny their complexity, which is what we've seen on both sides in this matter, but to look for ways to connect, to understand each other, and to find ways to deal with our issues in a more collaborative way. We can feel empathy for Palestinian people without being anti-Semitic, and we can also support the Jewish community without denying harms done by both sides in conflicts overseas. If you call Brisbane home, whether you're Jewish, Palestinian, LNP, Greens, Labor, whatever, we should be able to look beyond differing cultures, ideologies, religions, political ideals, and find some common ground. Harmony or conflict is a choice we have control over, and we should remember how important the words we use are. That was a long haul. Thanks if you've stuck with me through that. I'd love to know your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. As always, thanks to members for their support of this channel, and everyone who has said thanks for the work that I put into these videos by buying me a coffee. I did a wrap-up of the year of 2025 in Greater Brisbane here. I'd love it if you took a look. See ya.